All right, guys, welcome back to the Security Plus preparation course. Today we're going to be talking about security infrastructure. Now, security infrastructure refers to the design and the framework that organizations will use to protect their IT systems. Now, remember, these systems could be the facilities, could be networks, could be data, could be the data centers themselves. It all involves creating a structured approach that will integrate all of the security controls that we've talked about thus far into an overall IT infrastructure to ensure that our security posture is maintained. So remember that it can include everything that helps us protect our security posture. Now, one of the first things I want to talk about first is remember about ports. Ports themselves are how data is transmitted over a network, otherwise called as a virtual gateway. Now, ports themselves is a fundamental architecture when it comes to TCP and UDP communication. It allows us to have multiple entry points into a single IP address and even exit points, so that way we can communicate between more than one device. For the Security Plus, make sure that you understand the ports, what they are, and some of the more common ports there are. For instance, for port ranges itself, we should know that their port ranges can reach from 0 to 65,535. This is 2 to the power of 16 minus 1, and these are all the ports that we can have. Now remember, this is going to be the well-known ports of 0 to 123. So from 0 to 10,023, these are used for the well-known ports. Now the registered ports are 1024 to 49151, and you can use these for any service that you want. And then anything above this is the dynamic ports. So whenever your client decides to communicate with something on the internet, remember that it's going to use these dynamic ports as their source port and then use the proper protocol port for the destination port. For instance, if I'm talking on HTTPS, you're going to find that it's going to use port 443 for the destination port. Here's some of the well-known ports. We have 20 and 21 being file transfer protocol, 22 being SSH. And as you go through all these ports, just know that these are some of the ports that you should know about, the majority of the ports that you should know about for the Security Plus, just in case you do see either a log with a port on it or a specific question about port entries themselves. For instance, if I want to block all FTP traffic through my firewall, I should block port 20 and 21. Now, we use protocols throughout our system to make sure that they act like a language that we're going to talk through. Okay, so when you're thinking about protocols themselves, remember that these are the rules governing the communications that we're talking through. Now, the port is the actual gateway, while the protocol is going to be the language we speak in. There are some common ports that you should know about. We should all know that TCP is a connection-oriented protocol. This allows us to have reliable data delivery. It establishes connections before the data is transferred. Remember the three-way handshake. And we make sure that no data is lost during transmission because we will retransmit it if needed. Now we also have the UDP protocol, which is a connectionless protocol. It is faster transmission, but doesn't have a guaranteed delivery. There is no error checking with retransmission of lost packets with UDP, but it is very suitable for anything that's going to be time sensitive or anything that's going to be streaming, like voice or video over IP. We have HTTP and HTTPS. We use these whenever we browse the web. These are used by web browsers to allow us to browse different websites between different URLs. And HTTPS is the added encryption via SSL TLS communications. Now be aware, we normally use TLS here, while SSL is now old and does have vulnerability weaknesses. SMTP is used for simple mail transfer protocol. It is used for sending emails across the internet, and we either use port 25 for insecure or 587 for secure connections. DNS is what we translate from human readable domain names into IP addresses so we can use to communicate. And remember, this runs on port 53. FTP is used to transfer between systems. There are some secure alternatives, remember, of SFTP, and FTP uses port 20 and 21, while SFTP runs on 22, which is the same as SSH, but not SSH itself. Which reminds me, we do have port 22 on SSH, Secure Shell. This normally allows us for remote access into networking and Linux-based hosts. Now, some of the best practices that we should know about is, for one, we need to close any unused ports. You need to disable or close ports that are not actively in use. Every open port is a potential entry point for the attacker, so minimizing open ports will help us reduce our attack surface. Use of secure protocols is something we should also focus on. Rather than running on insecure protocols, we should be using their secure alternatives. For instance, we should be using HTTPS instead of HTTP, or SFTP rather than FTP. These secure protocols will encrypt the data in transit, help protecting it from interception and the integrity of the data. We have our firewall rules. We're going to implement firewall rules to control access to the ports and protocols. And firewalls can block unauthorized access to open ports by restricting traffic based on IP address, protocol type, or even port numbers. We may want to use port knocking. Port knocking is a technique used to hide open ports from unauthorized users. The port only becomes accessible when a predefined sequence of knocks or connection attempts to close ports occurs in the correct order. Now, we can also use monitor and log traffic. And what we want to do is we want to keep these ports under surveillance, right? We want to make sure that we're monitoring all of this traffic for unusual activity, especially on critical ports. And if we do see any activity, logging will be something we want to do so we can help detect port scanning attempts or any unauthorized access. And then finally, we should always update regularly. We need to ensure that the services are running on open ports are updated with the latest security patches, because these weaknesses in the software can be exploited if the services are not patched regularly. Next, we'll talk about firewalls. Now, firewalls are one of the foundational elements of network security architecture. They're going to act as a barrier between our trusted network and our untrusted network, such as the internet. Now, what do we use these firewalls for? Well, firewalls can monitor all traffic entering or leaving the network, examining the packet headers, and applying security rules to decide whether or not the traffic should be allowed or blocked. Firewalls will help enforce control policies by restricting who can access certain parts of the network, and administrators can help define these rules to allow or deny them based on user identity, device type, or even their IP address. Firewalls can help prevent unauthorized users from gaining access to the network by blocking malicious traffic. They also monitor for signs of unauthorized access attempts, such as port scanning or brute force attacks. Advanced firewalls, like next-generation firewalls, can inspect traffic at layer 7 and analyze things from the applications and block malicious behavior. This type of filtering allows the firewalls to distinguish between legitimate application traffic and malicious traffic disguised as normal communication. Many of our firewalls may support VPN. Now, this VPN functionality allows for secure, encrypted communication between remote users and internal networks. VPN data itself will be protected between encryption for in transit to help the organization stay safe. Remember, this is where we're going to use a lot of our remote access. This is where our remote users are going to be. Now, there's a few different types of firewalls. We've got our packet filtering, which normally filters on layer 3 as they pass through the network. We've got our stateful firewalls that can track active connections and make decisions based on the context of the traffic itself. We've got our proxies. Our proxies are intermediaries between internal users and external networks. They can help make requests behalf on the users, inspect and return data before passing it along. Now this can hide internal network addresses as well. We've got our next generation firewalls, where we combine a traditional firewall with advanced security features on the application layer, remember layer 7. And this could have additional settings like intrusion detection and prevention systems, and it can even have deep packet inspections. These are more granular and can help things that are a little more sophisticated in their attacks. We've also got cloud-based firewalls, or otherwise known as firewalls as a service. And these cloud-based firewalls are hosted in the cloud and provide firewall protection for cloud-based infrastructures. Okay. Now they typically are easier to set up, and they can have technologies all the way through the next generation firewalls, so all the way up to layer 7. Our next technology I want to talk about will be IDSs and IPSs. Okay, so an IDS itself will monitor network traffic, analyze it, and raise alerts when suspicious activities is found, while an IPS not only will detect the threat, but will take action or block and mitigate the traffic in real time. Okay, so the big key here, remember the IPS is going to take action. This is what the big key, the big difference is. Now here's some of the key characteristics that you'll see between an IDS and an IPS. Because remember, they're pretty much identical, but one of the biggest things is depending on where they're going to be placed in the network and their actions that they can complete. So the impact on network traffic on an IDS is almost nothing because it's just monitoring. But an IPS needs to monitor and inspect before passing through, so it can actually slow things down. Make sure that you understand key concepts like true positives. This is where the detection system correctly identifies a threat. A false positive, where a detection system incorrectly flags as normal activity as a threat. So it might block something that needs to be going through. A false negative, maybe there's a threat and it fails to detect it. A true negative, where the detection system correctly flags normal activity as normal activity. Know these for the test. Next, we'll get into network appliances. And we've talked a lot about network appliances in other classes, but for the SecurityPlus, we should know the basics of network appliances and what they're used for. For instance, the router itself is essential for network appliances because it's going to help us direct packets between networks. Okay? They ensure that data is sent through the most efficient path, helping different devices communicate with each other across local or even wide area networks. And they can have basic security features like access control lists or even encryption for secure data transfer. Then we've got our switches. Switches are normally used within networks, and they help us connect devices. Remember our computers, servers, printers, and manage all the traffic between them. Okay. They're going to operate normally at layer 2, and they're only going to deliver data to the intended device within the network. Now, some switches can have advanced security features like port security or VLAN segmentation, which normally will operate at layer 3. Firewalls themselves are dedicated security appliances that monitor and filter incoming and outgoing traffic, right? Remember, we just talked about these, so remember they could be hardware or software based, and they can operate either at layer 4 or layer 7. We've got load balancers, and load balancers help distribute traffic across multiple servers or devices so that no single device is overwhelmed. For one, this is going to improve performance and also availability in our applications. So this is where we're going to get some redundancy. Okay. We should know what an IDS and an IPS is. While we just talked about them, remember these are devices that are going to monitor traffic for signs of malicious activity. And remember the difference between an IDS and an IPS is the IPS has the ability to act upon the traffic based on a certain set of rules. Maybe drop it, maybe block it, do something to the traffic. But they're both going to alert us whenever this gets detected. We may have our proxy servers. And remember, the proxy server is an intermediary between the users and the external services, like websites or cloud applications. They can help us filter traffic, enforce security policies, or even cache frequently accessed content so we're not getting that content over and over. We've got our VPN appliances, virtual private network. They provide secure encrypted channels of communication for our users accessing the network remotely. And remember that VPNs are not just for users, but could also be for our vendors, so we can have secure communication from outside our network for the vendors as well. Unified threat management. These are appliances that integrate multiple security features. These kind of have multiple things in there, such as firewalls, IDSs, IPSs, anti-malware, content filtering, all in a single device. Then we have our web application firewalls. Web application firewalls are specialized firewalls to protect web applications, and they can filter and monitor HTTP traffic very well. WAFs are designed to defend against common web-based attacks like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgeries, or even distributed denial of service attacks. Next, we'll talk about port security. Port security refers to the set of measures designed to protect and control access to network ports, ensuring only that authorized devices and traffic can connect to a network. There are a few different ways of doing this. The first way would be MAC address filtering. This is the most common technique, where we'll use a MAC address, and remember the MAC address is something that's built into the network interface card and is built in to tell us the manufacturer in a special fingerprint on the MAC that's unique to the card and allows us to filter based off this MAC address. So think of it like a whitelist or a blacklist. Is your MAC on our list? If so, we might let you in. We can do static or dynamic MAC address filtering. Static is where administrators manually configure the MAC address on each port. So that way, this method is it's a very manual process, right? The administrators themselves have to put your MAC address on the port itself to be able to access that port. Rather, that the dynamic MAC address assignments, where the switch can automatically learn and remember the MAC address, and this is normally on the first device that gets connected. After learning the device's MAC address, the switch will restrict access to that port to just that one port. We may have port violations. A port violation occurs when an unauthorized device tries to connect to the port, or when the device exceeds the allowed number of MAC addresses on a port. Okay. We may have that maximum MAC address limit on the ports. For instance, we may allow them to have 2 MAC addresses on a port. Maybe we have a phone and a computer. Well, that's 2 devices, which means I need 2 MAC addresses that be able to talk through it. Now, we do have sticky MAC addresses, where the switch can dynamically learn the MAC address connected to the device, let them be configured, and making them sticky. This means the switch itself will remember these MAC addresses even across reboots and retain port security. Now there's a few different ways of doing port actions here. The first one would be protect, where the port will silently drop unauthorized traffic but not generate any logs. The next would be restrict, where the port drops unauthorized traffic but also generates logs. This way we can monitor. Or finally, we can shut down, where the port will be immediately disabled. The administrators must manually re-enable it. This is the most aggressive response and is often used in high security environments. And remember, we always are going to have 82x.1x, otherwise known as radius authentication. And this is an IEEE standard, 802.1x. And be aware that anything with 802.1 is anything we're dealing with network interfaces here. The standard is a port-based access control mechanism. And what this can do is require the devices to authenticate before they can gain access. Okay, and there's multiple ways they can do this: via credentials, via certificates, and also using the port security concepts we thought before. Maybe also make sure that the MAC address is on the authorized list. Now, some of the attacks that we may see with this would be MAC address spoofing. This is where the attacker can attempt to spoof the MAC address of an unauthorized device, or of an authorized device, and this will allow them to gain access to the network port. So by pretending to be a trusted device, attackers can bypass port security and gain unauthorized access to sensitive network information. There's the CAM table overflow, where an attacker will flood the network switch with fake MAC addresses, causing the switch to fill its table and revert into what we call a hub. So instead of the traffic going from one port to the intended port, now traffic goes out all ports. And we also call this ARP table poisoning when we try to overflow it. Okay, because the ARP table itself is where all MAC addresses live on a switch, so I'll know which MAC address belongs to which port. Or we can have unsecured ports in public or shared areas. So these can pose a security risk if they're not configured properly. Next, we'll talk about securing network connections. What we're going to talk about here is common techniques that we use to secure our network communications. For instance, we may use encryption. Encryption is a process for encoding data so that not only authorized parties can access it or read it. This is all for confidentiality and even integrity. We can use IPsec. IPsec is used for Secure Internet Protocol, is what it stands for. And what it's used for is normally through VPN connections. Okay. We have Secure Shell, and this will provide secure remote access to network devices, such as servers or routers. And remember, Secure Shell is going to encrypt both the command line instructions and the data exchanged between the two devices. We may have wireless security. And remember, in wireless security, there are multiple encryption algorithms. The latest and greatest is going to be WPA3. And this is where we want to ensure that our wireless network is secured, so that way if somebody is snooping our wireless traffic, they won't be able to read it. Public key infrastructure. This is where we use symmetric and asymmetric encryption. Remember, we're going to use public key pairs with asymmetric encryption to ensure that authentication and digital signatures are used. Remember, this is going to help us verify the identity of all communicating parties. We may use NAC, and we just talked about NAC, but we just want to make sure that those devices are authorized and compliant, right? We want to make sure when they connect to our network, is their security posture up to date, maybe with their patching and antivirus software, before we grant them access. We can use our firewalls to control the network and the flow of traffic in and out of our network. And remember, firewalls can be configured as an allow or a block for specific types of traffic, so that way we can protect against unauthorized access. We can use IDSs or IPSs to monitor network. And we're looking for signs of malicious activity. And remember that an IDS detects and alerts administrators, while an IPS will take proactive steps to block or mitigate attacks. And then we could do email encryption. Email encryption protects the contents of the email communications, so that way they're not read by an unauthorized party. We can encrypt email messages, attachments, and ensure that all sensitive information remains confidential. Common threats that you should know about: man-in-the-middle attacks, otherwise known as on-path attacks, is when an attacker intercepts and potentially alters communication between two parties without their knowledge. The attacker normally positions themselves between the sender and the receiver, capturing data and possibly even injecting malicious content into the communication. They could also use eavesdropping, and this occurs when an attacker listens in on network communication, captures sensitive information such as passwords or even confidential information like confidential data, and it's common when unsecured or poorly secured wireless networks are incurred. Okay. When you go to Starbucks, are you sure you're connecting to the Starbucks Wi-Fi and not to the guy's laptop or his backpack right next to you first? You talk about replay attacks, where an attacker captured valid communication and retransmits it to unauthorized, and retransmits it as an unauthorized effect. And remember, replay attacks often target authentication mechanisms so they can get unauthorized access into a system. You can do packet sniffing, which is the process of capturing and analyzing packets of data as they travel across the network. Or we can do denial of service attacks, where we can flood a network or service with traffic, making it unavailable for legitimate users to use. Okay. While this isn't really related to data theft, remember DOS attacks themselves can interrupt communications and serve as a precursor of other types of attacks, like man-in-the-middle or data breaches. Let's talk a little bit about some cloud-based technology. In 701, they want us to know a little bit more about the cloud. And so SD-WAN is a software-defined wide area network. It's a virtual WAN architecture that allows organizations to connect users and branch offices across multiple types of connections. Okay. Now, a lot of times this is going to be used in a cloud-based environment, but it could be used anywhere along the way and allows us to connect our offices together, even if they're geographically diverse across the world. Now we've got SASE, Secure Access Secure Edge. Secure Access Service Edge is an architecture framework that converge wide area network, WANs, to cloud-based security solutions. Okay. And so there are two different ones here. We've got software-defined WAN versus our Secure Access Service Edge. And what we're trying to do here is make sure that we're connecting multiple devices across different locations in a secure fashion. So key features of each. In SD-WAN, we want to optimize our path selection. Normally we'll use network conditions and help us monitor network paths in real time. It will give us a centralized management interface for orchestration. This makes it a little simpler to manage. It will give us enhanced security. It's normally very cost effective because instead of having dedicated MPLS lines or dedicated internet lines, we can now use shared lines at a reduced operational cost. And SD-WAN are designed to improve performance of cloud-based applications as well as security as a service applications. Okay, because we can route it directly to the nearest cloud center to minimize our latency and enhance user experience. Now on SASE, we can integrate SD-WAN capabilities with a converged network and security architecture. Pretty much the same thing, but the converged technologies allows us to reduce the complexity. Okay, makes it a little easier to manage. Now SASE itself is a cloud native solution, which means that we can maintain the security and networking services delivered to the cloud rather than on-premises appliances. Again, remember, cloud is going to allow us to have scalability, flexibility, global reach, and even enable us to extend secure access to any user in the world. SASE also automatically incorporates zero trust. So zero trust will help us reduce the risk of unauthorized access. We have dynamic policies. So these policies will allow us to apply consistent security policies across the organization. SASE is in cloud, so guess what? We still have global scale and low latency. And then SASE also will provide us secure internet access through things like secure web gateways to help us ensure that all security within the cloud is protected. Now, one of the other things that we should know for the SecurityPlus are the infrastructure considerations. So we're looking at different types of infrastructure controls. And when we're selecting these controls, we must consider the balance between security, performance, scalability, cost, and even usability. So remember that these controls must not only protect our infrastructure, but they should be able to adapt to new and emerging risks. So in this process, we're going to have the organization help develop a robust and resilient network security posture, and there are different categories that you need to understand. So the first one would be, is it a preventative control? These are designed to stop security incidents before they happen. These include measures like restricting access or enforcing security policies, maybe even preventing unauthorized activities on the network. Now, these common ones could be like using encryption or access controls or even network segmentation. Okay. Is it going to be a detective control, which helps alert administrators to potential security incidents or even policy violations? Remember that these controls are going to help us contain a threat, recover from systems, and even detect intrusions, anomalies, and misconfigurations as they happen. We've got corrective controls. And corrective controls are actions taken to minimize the impact of the security incident once they've been detected. And remember, we can have IPSs here because they're going to help prevent something as soon as they are detected. Is it a deterrent control? Maybe it's just used to discourage potential attackers or malicious actors by demonstrating that security measures are in place. Deterrent controls might include policies or even visible surveillance, maybe warning banners, just to let them know that we are monitoring these systems and there might be persecution if you do continue your activities. Are they compensating controls? And these are alternative security measures, and they're implemented when the primary controls cannot be fully applied. Now, these controls help mitigate risks while maintaining security compliance with policies or regulations. And then finally, we may have a physical control. And so when you're thinking about physical infrastructure, including our servers, networking equipment, and even our data centers, these controls will limit the access to the hardware and reduce the risk of tampering, theft, or even damage to the physical systems. So we need to make sure that we're selecting the right controls for the right environment. And for SecurityPlus, they do want us to understand some of the steps that we'd use. So the first one we'll do is we'll assess the environment and the requirements that are needed for our personal use case. Okay, this could involve identifying critical assets, understanding potential threats, and even determining the security objectives that we're looking for here. Then we're going to conduct a risk assessment. We're going to identify those potential threats and the weaknesses that can impact our organization's infrastructure. Because if we understand the risks, then we can prioritize those risks based on the likelihood and impact of the potential threats, for instance, on our risk register, right? We then can select the controls that are aligned with our framework. Now, depending on that framework, you could be using ISO 27001, maybe the NIST cybersecurity framework. Whatever framework that you're going to align yourself with, the framework is going to allow us to have best practice for securing our infrastructure and ensuring compliance with this framework. We will then want to balance our security with performance and usability. While security is critical, we should not hinder the performance or usability of our systems, right? We need to implement layered security. In other words, this defense in depth. Now, a single security control is rarely sufficient to protect an organization. So, what we like to do is we implement a layered security approach, defense in depth, by selecting multiple complementary controls to protect different layers of the network. This ensures that if one fails, the rest will remain in place to mitigate the risk. We can consider scalability and flexibility. Well, this means, is it going to be particularly flexible? Can the business expand or adopt to new technologies or even move to the cloud-based infrastructure? These controls should be adaptable so we can, if we change the requirements, we don't require a complete overhaul. We want to monitor all of our controls on a regular basis because security is not a one-time task. As new threats emerge, businesses need to evolve, and we need to make sure that we're checking on things regularly by monitoring it, patching it, and doing regular security assessments to ensure that all the controls still remain functional as intended. This brings to the end of security infrastructure. If you're in the class, this is where we will start doing our Kahoot. In the next section, we will talk about identity access management. I'll see you there.